Hi, public speakers. Today we're going to be talking about how do you evaluate a public speech? How do you grade it? What criticisms are appropriate of a public speech? And also we'll be giving some idea about how I'll grade your speeches to give you some predictability about how your speeches will be judged in this class. But one of the things that I like to get accustomed to with all beginning public speakers is having them grade the speeches of others to get comfortable with not only the criteria that many people use to grade a public speech, but also the criteria that I use to grade your public speeches so you have a sense of where you stand in the class even before you've given your first speech. Now, last time, in the last lecture, I asked you to grade the vocal quality, just the vocal quality of 3 sample student speeches I had found online. Today, and in your writing assignment for this week, we're going to be grading the speeches of a few famous people speaking at college graduations, these commencement speeches of Steve Jobs, of Ellen DeGeneres, and J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter author. Now, how am I going to ask you to grade these speeches? Well, I'll give you the criteria I use to grade your speeches. And there are 6 criteria that I use. I start first with voice, which we talked about last time, so I won't belabor this point just too much. The key here, the golden rule, if you will, is to find a balance between what feels natural to you and what sounds good to an audience. The second criteria is nonverbal expressiveness. Now, I don't talk about nonverbals as much because, frankly, nonverbals are one of the more unique, eccentric, and individual characteristics of public speaking that we'll find. Some people feel comfortable doing exactly as I'm doing right now, where I have my hands folded in front of me, and I'm speaking as clearly as I can to the camera. You'll find this when you see somebody like Brian Williams speak on NBC News, or perhaps Jon Stewart. But some people favor a more bombastic style, where their facial expressiveness and their hand gestures are much more wild. So if you imagine the comedy of Robin Williams, for instance, you might get a much more eccentric, much wilder kind of a style. And whatever you feel comfortable with, frankly, and is not distracting to your speech or takes away from the content of your speech, is what you should feel perfectly appropriate doing. What I concentrate on telling students not to do in terms of nonverbals is to do noisy or distracting nonverbals, wild waving gestures at random points in your speech, or holding on to something for dear life without moving any element of your body at all, so you look stiff and you look robotic and you look excessively rigid and unapproachable. The third element is eye contact. Last time we talked about what extemporaneous speaking is. And to me, extemporaneous speaking is where you prepare a thorough and well-written and edited set of notes that you then perform without consulting those notes as much because you've sort of written them into your brain already and you compose them in the air as you're speaking before the audience and interacting with them and looking at the audience and seeing how they're reacting to your speech. The golden rule for eye contact is that you should be able to speak for at least 2 sentences, preferably more, without looking down to consult your notes. What we want to avoid is either reading, where your head is completely down like this, you're not interacting with the audience hardly at all, or where you're constantly referencing your notes and so your head has this kind of bobble-headed function where you're always looking down and then looking back up, and there's no sustained eye contact for more than 3 to 4 seconds. The fourth criteria that I use is organization. We'll spend much of next week and the next 2 weeks talking about how to organize your speech. But for this point forward, all that matters is that when you're grading the speeches that we're going to grade this week, think about whether you can find a pattern. Is there a clear introduction? Are there clear main points? Are there separations or transitions between those main points? And does the speaker identify and then memorably conclude their speech? Number 5 is content. What I mean here is the use of evidence. Is the speaker making arguments? Does the speaker have the evidence, the data, the examples, the stories, the anecdotes, and the explanation to back up those arguments? Or are they just claims, assertions on their face that that the speaker expects the audience to take at face value? And then finally, the final criteria is a tough one, and that is the use of memorable, vivid language. These are key points, well-written, well-crafted points that paint a particular word image for an audience that they're likely to remember after the speech. This is something that makes the speeches of Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King such great touchstone speeches, is their use of unique metaphor, their use of unique grammatical structure, their use of unique sentence forms, and that's what makes their speeches last through the ages. And of course, none of us can fully emulate the speeches of King or Lincoln. It's an impossible standard, but we can do our best to incorporate phrases that the audience might latch onto and might take home because they're just so well written and well spoken. So those 6 criteria are my 6 criteria, and hopefully you can use these to evaluate the public speeches that I'll give you examples of. I'll spend a little bit of time through text on the next few Prezi slides going through these examples of 6 criteria so that they're fully formed in your minds, but then we'll use these to critique some speeches this week. Good luck, everyone.